When my phone rang that morning, I almost didn't answer. It was a number I didn't recognize, but something in my heart told me to pick it up. And when I heard his voice, soft, uncertain, trembling, it felt like time froze. It was my brother. I hadn't heard from him in 8 years. 8 years of birthdays missed, holidays ignored, and words left unsaid. And now, out of nowhere, he was calling. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, my hands shaking slightly as I held the phone. The morning light spilled through the curtains, dust floating in the air. I could hear him breathing on the other end. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, he whispered, "Hi, sis." 2 simple words, but they carried 1,000 memories. My throat tightened. I wanted to say so much how I'd missed him, how I'd replayed our last fight over and over, but all that came out was, "Hey." It's strange how silence can build walls between people who once shared everything. When we were kids, he was my protector. We grew up side by side, sharing secrets, fighting over toys, laughing at silly things. But when we got older, something shifted. Pride took over where love once lived. That morning, as he spoke, I felt the years melt away. His voice still had that same gentle tone, only softer now, maybe older, maybe sadder. He told me he had been thinking of me, that he was sorry, and before I could stop myself, tears rolled down my cheeks. I don't even know if they were tears of relief or sadness, maybe both. That phone call opened a door I thought had been locked forever. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just quiet, fragile words between 2 people who had once been everything to each other. And as I listened to him breathe, I realized something. Sometimes, life gives you a second chance, but only if you're brave enough to pick up the phone. When people see siblings arguing, they often say, "They'll make up soon." That's just how brothers and sisters are. But not every story ends that way. My brother, Daniel, and I grew up in a small, warm house at the end of Maple Street. Our parents didn't have much, but they gave us love, laughter, and Sunday dinners that somehow made everything feel whole. Daniel was 2 years older than me, quiet, careful, and protective. I was the talkative one, always running behind him, asking too many questions. We were inseparable. He'd walk me to school every morning, carrying my bag when it got too heavy. At night, he'd read me comic books under a blanket, using a flashlight so our parents wouldn't see. Sometimes, I still hear his voice in my head saying, "Don't worry, I got you." Back then, I believed he always would. But as we grew older, things began to change in small, unspoken ways. Daniel started helping Dad in the garage after school, while I spent more time with Mom in the kitchen. He became quiet, thoughtful. I became busy with friends, college dreams, and my own little world. When our parents passed away, first Mom, then Dad, we handled our grief differently. I cried openly, talking to anyone who would listen. Daniel stayed silent, burying himself in work. I mistook his silence for strength. He mistook my tears for weakness. That's where the distance began, not in anger, but in misunderstanding. I still remember our last family dinner, before everything fell apart. We sat across from each other, the table filled with food neither of us touched. He looked tired, distant. I wanted to ask him what was wrong, but I didn't. Instead, I said something careless, something I thought was small. He stood up, said, "You'll never understand," and walked out. I thought he'd come back the next day, but days turned into months. Months turned into years. We missed birthdays, weddings, even funerals, always one of us too proud to take the first step. Looking back now, I realize we weren't angry at each other. We were just hurt, both waiting for the other to say, "I miss you." If only one of us had. Time has a strange way of making distance feel normal. At first, I told myself, Daniel just needed space. A few weeks, maybe a month. But weeks became years. And that silence slowly became part of my life. Every family gathering had an empty chair that no one mentioned. His name floated in the air like something fragile we were afraid to touch. At Mom's memorial, someone asked, "Will your brother be coming?" I just smiled softly and said, "No, he's busy." But inside, I was aching. Because I didn't really know if he was busy, or if he just didn't want to see me. Sometimes I'd see his updates on social media, photos of a new car, his promotion, or friends celebrating his birthday. I'd hover over the like button, then stop myself. It's strange how pride can hold your finger still, even when your heart is breaking. One Christmas, I finally gathered the courage to send him a card. It was simple. Just a few words. "Thinking of you. Hope you're doing well. Love, Sarah." I waited days, then weeks. No reply. That card came back months later. Returned to sender. I don't know if he had moved, or if he just didn't want it. Either way, it felt like a door closing. Years went by like that. Friends told me to move on, to stop waiting for someone who had clearly made his choice. But they didn't understand. He wasn't just someone. He was my brother. The boy who used to hold my hand when I was scared. The one who'd tell me jokes when I cried. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop hoping he'd walk through my door one day and say, "Hey sis, I'm home." But he never did. Instead, life moved forward. I got married, had kids, built a home of my own. But every time something big happened, a birthday, a new job, even the birth of my son, I'd think, Daniel should be here. It's funny, you can fill your house with people and still feel the emptiness of the one person who isn't there. It was a rainy afternoon when everything changed. I was sitting by the window, folding laundry, watching the raindrops slide down the glass. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy. My phone buzzed with a message from an old family friend. It said, "Sarah, did you hear about Daniel?" My heart skipped. For a second, I couldn't breathe. I called her right away, my hands trembling. She told me Daniel had been in an accident, not serious, but enough to scare him. He was recovering at home, alone. After I hung up, I just sat there for a long time, staring at nothing. All those years of silence suddenly felt foolish, childish, even the idea that something could have happened to him before we ever spoke again. It broke something inside me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the house, thinking about our childhood, the laughter, the fights, the secrets. I thought about the last time I saw him, how angry we both were, how proud, and I whispered into the dark, "I'm sorry, Danny." I almost called him right then, but fear stopped me. What if he didn't want to hear from me? What if he still blamed me for everything? What if he'd changed so much that we were strangers now? The next morning, I wrote a letter instead. A real one. It wasn't long, just a few lines about missing him and hoping he was okay, but I never mailed it. It stayed in my drawer, tucked between old photos of us as kids. Weeks passed. Life went on, as it always does. But something had shifted inside me. I started replaying every moment we shared, the good, the bad, and the silent in between. And for the first time in years, I realized how much time we had wasted waiting for the other to make the first move. Then, one morning, months later, my phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated for a moment, that familiar ache rising in my chest. And when I finally answered, I heard a voice I thought I'd lost forever. "Hi sis." When I heard his voice, I didn't know whether to cry or stay silent. For a few seconds I couldn't even find words. I just sat there, holding the phone, afraid that if I spoke too soon, the moment might disappear. He said softly, "I wasn't sure you'd pick up." His voice was older now, slower, heavier, but it still had that familiar warmth. I swallowed hard and said, "I almost didn't." We both laughed a little, though it wasn't the kind of laugh that comes from joy. It was the kind that hides years of pain. He told me he had been thinking about me a lot lately, that the accident had made him realize how short life was. He said, "Lying in that hospital bed, I kept wondering if you even knew." I whispered, "I did. Someone told me." I wanted to call, but I didn't know if I should. There was silence, a long one, the kind of silence where 1,000 unspoken words float between two people, waiting for courage to catch up. Finally, he sighed. "I don't even remember what we fought about anymore. I just remember how it felt. Losing you." That broke me. Tears slipped on my face before I could stop them. "Me too," I said quietly. "I thought you hated me." He gave a small laugh, the kind that sounds like someone trying not to cry. "No, I never hated you. I just didn't know how to come back." For the first time in years, we talked, really talked, about the things we missed, about mom and dad, about how we both carried guilt, thinking we were the reason the other stayed away. He said, "I kept waiting for you to call." I smiled through my tears. "I was waiting for you." We both went quiet again, but this time it felt different. Softer, warmer, like the silence had finally turned into peace. Before hanging up, he said, "Can we start over?" My voice cracked as I answered, "I've been waiting 8 years to hear that." After we said goodbye, I held the phone to my chest and just sat there, letting the weight of all those lost years finally lift. A week after the call, Daniel asked if he could visit. His voice was hesitant, almost like he was afraid I'd say no, but I didn't hesitate. I said yes. The morning he was supposed to come, I couldn't sit still. I kept pacing around the living room, fixing things that didn't need fixing. I must have checked the clock 100 times. When I finally heard a car pull into the driveway, my heart started racing. I stood by the window, and there he was, standing next to his car, unsure, holding a small paper bag in his hand. For a moment, he just looked at the house. Then he looked at me through the window. I walked to the door slowly, my hands trembling. When I opened it, we both just stood there. No words, no smiles, just quiet. He looked older. His hair had gray at the edges, and his eyes looked tired, but they were still the same eyes I grew up trusting. Finally, I whispered, "Hi." He nodded, almost shyly. "Hey sis." For a second, it felt like we were kids again, like no time had passed at all. And then, before I could think, I stepped forward and hugged him. At first, he stiffened. Then, I felt his arms slowly wrap around me. I didn't cry right away. I just stayed there, listening to the sound of his breathing, feeling the weight of all those missing years between us. When we finally sat down, he handed me the paper bag. Inside was an old photo frame, the two of us, as children, covered in dirt, laughing. He said quietly, "I kept this on my shelf. Even when I was angry, that's when I cried. Not loud, not broken, just quiet tears of relief." We talked for hours that day, about everything and nothing, about the years we missed, and the ones we could still have. At one point, he looked around and said, "It still smells like Mom's cooking in here." I laughed softly. I guess some things don't change. When he left that evening, we didn't say goodbye, just, "See you soon." And this time, I believed it. Because some bonds don't disappear, they just wait, patiently, for love to remember its way home. After that first visit, Daniel started coming by more often. At first, it was once every few weeks, then, almost every Sunday. We didn't talk about the past much, not right away. It was as if we both knew that healing needed silence, too. He'd bring groceries sometimes, or fix the leaky tap in the kitchen, just like he used to when Dad was around. One afternoon, as we sat on the porch drinking tea, he said, "It feels strange being back here." I smiled. "Strange, but right." He nodded, staring out at the yard. "Yeah, right." There were moments when the guilt tried to creep in, moments when we both felt the weight of all those years we wasted. I remember one evening, he looked down at his hands and said softly, "I missed so much of your life." I reached over, touched his arm, and said, "Then start now. Be here for what's left." He smiled, but his eyes glistened. It wasn't an apology, but it didn't need to be. Some wounds heal without words, only presence. Slowly, the walls between us began to fade. He came over for my son's birthday, stayed late for dinner, even told a few embarrassing childhood stories that made everyone laugh. For the first time in years, I saw my brother laugh, really laugh. One evening, after everyone had gone to bed, he stayed behind to help me clean up. As we washed the dishes, he said quietly, "I used to stand right here with Mom. She'd hum that same song you just did." I stopped. "You remember that?" He nodded, smiling faintly. "I remember everything." It was in that moment I realized, even in the years we spent apart, the love never disappeared. It had just gone quiet. That night, as he drove away, I stood by the window again, watching his taillights fade down the street. Only this time, there was no sadness, just peace. Sometimes, the hardest part of forgiveness is forgiving yourself for what you didn't say, for what you couldn't fix. But when I saw him drive away, I knew one thing for sure. We had both found our way back home. It's been 3 years since that first phone call. Sometimes, when my phone rings and I see Daniel's name, I still pause for a second. Not because I'm unsure, but because it still feels like a small miracle. He calls almost every day now, sometimes just to say, "How was your day?" or "Did you eat yet?" It's ordinary, simple, and that's exactly what makes it beautiful. We've both changed. We talk softer now, listen more carefully. There's no rush, no bitterness, just gratitude that we found our way back before it was too late. Last month, Daniel and I visited our parents' graves together. It was the first time we'd stood side by side there since the funerals. The air was cool, the grass freshly cut. He placed a small bunch of white lilies on Mom's stone, and I could see his hands shaking a little. "I think she'd be happy," I said softly. He nodded, eyes glistening. She'd say, "Finally, my kids are talking again." We both laughed through our tears. That day, we didn't talk about the years we lost. We talked about the ones still ahead, about family dinners, holidays, and how he promised to teach my son how to ride a bike, just like he taught me. As the sun began to set, I looked at him and said, "I never thought we'd get here." He smiled. That same crooked smile I remembered from childhood. Me neither. But I'm glad we did. Driving home that evening, I realized something simple yet powerful. Sometimes, love doesn't come back in a grand gesture or a perfect apology. Sometimes, it returns quietly through a phone call, a hug, or just a shared cup of tea. Life will always give us reasons to drift apart. Pride, pain, misunderstanding, but it will also give us small chances to come back together. And when that moment comes, you just have to be brave enough to answer. Because forgiveness doesn't erase the past, it redeems it. And love, when given a second chance, can still find its way home.